Nearly 8 million Canadians who identify as having one or more disabilities, in some cases from early childhood. For parents of children with disabilities, there may be unique financial considerations to keep in mind. Georgia Swan, tax and estate planner at TD joins us now to discuss some of them. Georgia, always great to have you with us.
I'm glad to be here again.
All right, we have a lot to unpack. Before we get to the financial implications, tell us what a family would need to consider for a child with a disability.
Well, first of all, I think a lot of times we approach these issues from the perspective of a parent who's looking at it because they have a child with a disability since birth or since very soon after birth when it was identified. But the other thing we have to think about is disabilities can actually happen at any time during life. It might be something like PTSD or a mental health crisis or an accident, addiction that may actually manifest once the child is an adult. And so parents may have planned in a particular way for a particular reality, and all of a sudden now they might have to pivot. So that's the first consideration. And of course, if it's something that manifests later in life, parents, unfortunately, may have to plan very differently than the parent that kind of had the head start. So these are some considerations. And as well, we have to also consider the fact that a particular condition may not be static. It may be something that starts in a particular way, but then we have no idea what the potential of that child may be. Just because, for example, a child is born with Down syndrome doesn't mean that their future is set in stone. So one of the other challenges that can happen sometimes is you're planning for a particular reality that you think is, what the status quo is going to be, but then that changes. And so, parents have to be ready to always pivot and to find sort of, what the best course of action is in that case. Now, my general, guidance is always plan for the absolute best thing that you can do, the most amount that you can possibly put away. And then what happens if you don't need it? What's the downside of that? You overplanned, you oversaved? There's nothing wrong with that.
Great context. As part of this planning, I understand those medical assessments can be involved, and sometimes for non-visible disabilities. I think we can show some examples of what we mean by that, whether it can be depression, addiction, autism, anxiety disorders. Given that sort of context, what do we need to start thinking then about some of the financial implications? I imagine things start to get a little clearer.
Well, the reality is there's going to be increased costs, of course. Now, raising any child is expensive these days, but of course, where you have to have supplemental medical care, additional, educational supports or physiotherapy supports, that oftentimes obviously can cost more. If you have to put in place personal services workers to assist, family caregivers, or perhaps even, the family needs occasional respite care if, the care of the child is significant and the family just needs a break. The other issue is that parents of children with disabilities may not be able to secure high-value work because they may have to take lots of time off of work, or maybe one parent will not be able to work at all. So all of these things have to come into play. And then with these increased costs, oftentimes family members are looking to the assistance of, the siblings of the child or other family members, and that always isn't appropriate or may not even be possible. So it's really important, to look at what the needs are of the child. And then, the question becomes, okay, now let's plan for how we can support those financially or maybe even physically ourselves.
When the child grows up, enters adulthood, I imagine there's a whole range of new issues, including what kind of authority does a parent have when it comes to their care, to their property?
So this is often a surprise for parents. When a child reaches the age of majority, as a matter of fact, the law assumes that they have capacity to manage their own property and manage their own personal care. So where you have a child that basically has been living with a disability for their entire life and may not be able to do these things, it's really surprising to parents that, as soon as the child maybe turns 18 or 19 or whatever the age of majority in the province that you live is, that the law says, no, 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 you have no authority over this child. This child is now an adult. So at that point, the parent will have to go through the process of being appointed as the guardian of the child's person and or property. And that is a court process. It's an application that has to be made. And the parent has to submit a guardianship plan to the court. And one of the things that should also be considered there is who the alternate guardians will be. So, I mean, if something happens to the parents, let's put in place what the alternates are going to be. So that may be another family member. It could be a corporate guardian, such as a trust company. So these are all considerations in that process that have to be put in place. And oftentimes, as I said, it's a real surprise for parents who have basically just put their head down and are caring for their child. And then all of a sudden, they realize the law has actually thrown them a little bit of a curveball.
As always, Georgia, you lay out all the issues so clear. At the same time, there is a lot here. What about supports out there for these families?
So obviously, there are provincial disability support programs. And then, of course, the parents can also plan using a registered disability, an RDSP. So, that's basically a registered investment account that they can use. And then, of course, there are things like the Canada Pension Plan Children's Benefit. So where you have a child that's dependent and 25 years of age or younger, that's also provides some assistance. But also the parent has to become their own advocate, their own researcher, because there's a lot of programs out there. And sometimes you just have to go out there and just start looking.
It sounds like there's supports, but at the same time, you need to do some work. Perhaps an advisor could help on this.
Absolutely. There are advisors that specialize to an extent in this area, lawyers that also work in this area. And as well, it's always helpful if you have your own support system in place. So family members that maybe can do a little bit of research for you. But when it comes to the financial side of things, your financial planner or your financial advisor is, your best defense there.